The studio lights were already blazing when Senator John Kennedy stepped onto the stage. The crowd buzzed with anticipation. This wasn't just another debate. Tonight was marketed as a conversation on the future of America, but everyone knew what it really was. A political showdown. On one side, the longtime progressive lion, Senator Bernie Sanders. On the other, the sharp-tongued Louisiana conservative who had become a social media lightning rod, John Kennedy. Bernie was already seated, glasses low on his nose, papers in hand. Kennedy, ever casual in posture but razor-sharp in presence, offered a brief nod and took his seat across from him. The moderator, a stiff-looking journalist from a national network, cleared his throat. "Senators," he began, "let's begin with the topic on everyone's mind, trust in government." It didn't take long for the tension to rise. Kennedy criticized bloated bureaucracy and career politicians who'd rather campaign than legislate. Bernie countered with fire, accusing Kennedy of posing as a populist while protecting the wealthiest Americans. Then it happened. Bernie leaned forward, his voice sharper than ever. "You know what bothers me, John?" he said, tone icy. "You talk about the people like you know them, but you've made a career out of protecting corporate interests. You're not a man of the people. You're a fraud." The word hung in the air like smoke from a match just lit. Kennedy didn't blink. He didn't flinch. He simply looked at Bernie, the corners of his mouth curled slightly, not quite a smile. The crowd quieted. Even the moderator hesitated. And Kennedy spoke. "I'd rather be called a fraud by a man who's never run a business," he said slowly, "than pretend the government can fix everything while it's broken from the inside out." A gasp rippled through the studio. It wasn't just the words, it was the calm, almost surgical precision with which he delivered them. Cameras zoomed in. Twitter was already ablaze. The battle had begun. The tension was no longer simmering. It was boiling. Bernie's jaw flexed as he leaned forward again, undeterred. "Let me remind you," he snapped, "that I've spent decades fighting for working families while you've spent yours rubber-stamping tax cuts for billionaires." The audience responded with a wave of murmurs, some supportive, some disapproving. The split in the room mirrored the divide on stage. Kennedy's hand slowly adjusted his tie, but he remained unshaken. "You're right about one thing, Senator," Kennedy said. "You've been fighting for decades, and yet here we are, still broke, still divided, still stuck. Maybe it's not about how long you've been fighting. Maybe it's about how often you've been wrong." The moderator tried to interject, but it was already too late. The gloves were off. Bernie stood up now, pointing a trembling finger across the table. "You think this is a game? You think throwing out one-liners and zingers helps the single mom in Ohio working 2 jobs just to stay afloat?" Kennedy's voice was low, almost quiet, but cut with diamond clarity. "No, sir. But pretending the government can babysit every adult decision, that's how we keep her stuck there." That silence again, it wasn't just the weight of the words, it was the audience processing the shift in tone. It had stopped being a political debate. It had become a philosophical clash. Behind the scenes, production assistants watched the live feed in awe. No one had scripted this. No one could. On social media, the hashtag number Kennedy versus Bernie was trending #1 nationwide. Clips were already being clipped. Captions already typed. Opinions flared. Allies on both sides sharpened their tweets. And Kennedy leaned back, arms crossed, letting the moment hang just long enough before delivering one last quiet blow. "Just because you shout the loudest doesn't mean you're the only one who cares." The room was still, and suddenly Sanders wasn't so quick to fire back. The moderator, visibly rattled, shuffled his cue cards. Let's move on to health care," he said weakly, trying to restore order. But the momentum had already left his hands. It belonged now to the 2 men staring each other down. Bernie adjusted his mic and exhaled. "You want to talk about health care, John," he said. "Tell that mother in Baton Rouge why her child with leukemia should have to crowdfund chemo on Facebook while billion-dollar insurance companies profit off misery." Kennedy blinked slowly. His voice was calm, almost fatherly. "I've met that mother," he replied. "And I've also met the small business owner who can't afford to hire because he's drowning in regulation and premium hikes. You think you're fighting the system. You are the system." That landed. Bernie didn't speak for a second. His eyes narrowed. Not in anger, but calculation. He knew Kennedy was playing a different game now. Not just reactive, strategic. He wasn't trading punches. He was shifting the ground under Bernie's feet. "I'm tired of this narrative," Bernie finally said, voice hoarse. "That government is always the villain. That we can just trust private companies to care about people. That's delusional." Kennedy's reply was razor sharp. "It's not about trusting corporations. It's about not trusting anyone too much. That includes you, Senator." The audience erupted. This time it wasn't shock, it was energy, applause, gasps. Some even stood. People weren't just watching anymore, they were picking sides. And in that moment it became clear this wasn't a debate, it was a reckoning. Not between two politicians, but two American philosophies colliding in real time. One believed the system could be made whole if big enough. The other believed it was broken beyond repair, and only the people could fix it. Backstage, producers scrambled to extend the segment. Cameras zoomed tighter. Commentators whispered into earpieces. Something real was happening, and both men knew. The next exchange would define the night. Bernie's eyes didn't leave Kennedy. For a brief second, his face softened, only slightly, as if acknowledging the chess game unfolding in front of him. But the moment passed. He raised his voice again. "You talk about the people like you're one of them," Bernie said. "But let's be honest, John, you're a Yale-educated career politician with deep-pocketed donors. Don't sell me this homespun wisdom when you've spent decades at the political country club." A few laughs rippled through the crowd, sharp, edgy ones. Bernie's words cut deep. Even Kennedy tilted his head slightly, the smile gone from his lips. But then he leaned into the mic. "You know what I've learned about regular folks, Senator," Kennedy said. "They don't care where you went to school. They care if you listen, and if you don't, they'll throw you out, degrees and all." That stung. Kennedy shifted forward, elbows resting on the table now, voice lower, tighter. "And if you think having money makes you a villain, that's a luxury belief. Regular Americans want opportunity, not pity, and definitely not another lecture." There it was again, that undercurrent. This wasn't about left versus right anymore. It was about tone, about authenticity, and Kennedy, whether calculated or sincere, was speaking a language that reached beyond the stage. Bernie blinked. He was losing control of the emotional center of the debate, and he knew it. His fingers tapped nervously on the table. "Opportunity doesn't mean anything," Bernie shot back. "If people are drowning in debt, in illness, in despair, you say you care, but your policies don't." Kennedy didn't answer immediately. He looked down, paused, and then quietly, "I don't worship policy, Bernie. I believe in people. I believe they know how to stand once you stop knocking their legs out." No thunderous applause this time, just silence, focus, respect. The room had shifted again, and this time, Bernie didn't fire back. The studio was quiet now, not awkwardly so, but like a courtroom waiting for the next witness. Even the moderator, usually eager to maintain control, sat back slightly, eyes darting between the two senators like a tennis match with no predictable rhythm. Then something unexpected happened. A young woman from the audience stood up. "May I?" she asked, her voice firm, carrying across the room. The cameras shifted to catch her. The moderator blinked, clearly caught off guard, then nodded slowly. "I'm a single mother," she said, "and I've listened to both of you argue for 20 minutes. But I want to know something simple. If my son gets sick tonight, who's going to help me?" You could hear a pin drop. Bernie turned to her first, tone softened. "That's why I fought so hard for universal health care," he said. "So you'll never have to ask that question again." She nodded, respectful but unmoved. Then Kennedy turned to face her directly, not the audience, not the moderator, just her. "What's your name?" he asked. "Maya." "Maya," he said. "I don't believe you should have to ask that either. But the truth is, Washington's been promising to help people like you for decades, and somehow the help never comes. What I'll promise is different. I won't just fight for new laws. I'll fight to get the old ones out of your way." She stared at him, surprised, maybe even suspicious, but she didn't look away. "I'll believe that when I see it," she said, and Kennedy nodded. "Fair enough. Hold me to it." That single moment, raw, unscripted, entirely off message, spread across the internet like wildfire. It was clipped, subtitled, shared. The algorithms ate it up. "Hold me to it" became a phrase of the night. And Bernie, watching it unfold, realized something painful. He wasn't losing a debate. He was losing the room. The segment moved on, but the energy in the room never quite returned to neutral. Kennedy had shifted the emotional tone, not with aggression, but with presence. Still, Bernie wasn't ready to yield ground. The moderator brought up campaign financing. "Senator Kennedy," he began, "critics have accused you of being in the pocket of corporate donors." Bernie cut in. "Critics? That's rich. Just say it. He is. Look up his donors. Oil, pharma, Wall Street. You think they're giving him millions for his charm?" Laughter again, nervous, scattered. Bernie had gone sharp, too sharp. Kennedy didn't smile. "I grew up in Zachary, Louisiana," he said. "I learned two things early: keep your promises and never let anyone buy your voice. If someone thinks a donation buys me, they haven't been paying attention." Bernie leaned forward. "Then prove it. Say right now you'll support a ban on corporate PACs." Kennedy paused, not because he was rattled, but because the trap was obvious. Say yes and alienate allies, say no and Bernie wins the round. "I'll say this," Kennedy replied. "If banning PACs means we silence small business owners who built this country while Hollywood and the media keep shaping the narrative, then no. That's not a trade I'll make." A shift again, not in applause, but in weight. The room felt heavier. Kennedy wasn't defending corporations. He was repositioning power, and Bernie knew it. "You're trying to make this about culture wars," Bernie shot back. "This is about economic justice." Kennedy nodded. "You're right. And part of economic justice is letting people rise without asking permission from Washington." Boom. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't viral, but it was sticky. The kind of line that sits in your head later, when the headlines fade. And for the first time, Bernie's shoulders slumped, not in defeat, but in something heavier, frustration. Kennedy wasn't winning with fire. He was winning with restraint, and restraint resonated. The debate reached its final segment, audience questions. But by now, the crowd didn't feel like spectators. They felt like witnesses. Something real had unfolded on stage, and everyone knew it. A man in his early 60s, military jacket zipped up to his chin, approached the microphone. "I'm a veteran," he said, voice low but steady. "And I've voted Democrat most of my life, but I've also buried friends who didn't survive the system you both helped build. So here's my question. Why should any of us believe either of you anymore?" Silence. Bernie stood first. "Sir," he began, his tone respectful, "I've been arrested protesting wars, I've marched for veterans' care, and I've pushed to expand VA funding every year I've been in Congress. You don't have to believe me, but check my record. It's there." Polite applause, a solid answer, safe. Then Kennedy stepped forward, but he didn't stand behind the podium. He walked toward the vet, slowly. Microphone still clipped to his jacket. He didn't speak right away. "I don't know your name," he finally said, "but I'm sorry you had to bury your friends. And I don't blame you for not trusting me, or DC, or anyone who wears a tie and says, 'I understand.'" The vet didn't smile, but he didn't look away either. Kennedy kept going. "I can't undo the years. I can't give speeches to make that right. All I can do is this. I'll fight like hell so the next guy in your unit doesn't end up with a folded flag instead of a future." The man nodded slowly. "Name's Frank," he said. Kennedy held out a hand. I'll remember that. No music, no flash. Just two men who had seen different wars, one with bullets, the other with bureaucracy. And for a second, they stood on the same side. Social media exploded, not because of what Kennedy said, but how he said it. Bernie watched from behind his podium, and for the first time all night, he didn't look like a revolutionary. He looked out of time. The final minutes of the broadcast ticked down, but the debate had already spilled beyond the room. Twitter was on fire. TikTok was flooded with clips. The press gallery, once skeptical, was now scribbling furiously. The moderator tried to steer it back. One last question, she said, in one sentence. What do you want the American people to remember from tonight? Bernie didn't wait. That this system is rigged for the wealthy, and I'm the only one here fighting to fix it. Director, predictable, and for some, reassuring. Then came Kennedy. He didn't move, didn't gesture, just looked straight into the lens. I want them to remember this. You don't have to scream to be heard, and you don't have to agree with me to be respected. Boom. Not applause, not even a gasp, just a pause, the kind that comes when something lands too deep for words. The moderator blinked. Thank you both, she said, but it felt like the program was chasing its own ending. The cameras pulled back. The stage lights dimmed. Backstage, Bernie walked off without a word. His staff followed closely, whispering into phones, eyes already scanning headlines. Kennedy, meanwhile, stopped by the makeup table. A young intern, barely 21, stood there holding a notebook, wide-eyed. He nodded to her. You did great tonight, she said, blushing. He smiled genuinely. So did you. It was a small exchange. Unimportant maybe, but it had been seen. And within minutes it too would be online. Captioned, shared. The debate was over, but the ripple effect had just begun. The next morning the headlines weren't subtle. Kennedy redefines calm in chaos. Sanders clashes, Kennedy connects. A new kind of firepower, quiet resolve. Bernie's team doubled down, issuing a press release that framed the debate as substance versus sound bites. But the internet wasn't buying it. Not this time. Clips of Kennedy's answer to Frank, the veteran, had gone viral. Celebrities shared it. Journalists dissected it. Even some left-leaning pundits, normally critical of Kennedy's politics, admitted one thing. He'd made people feel seen. Cable news was split. Some praised Bernie's uncompromising truth-telling. Others noted how Kennedy disarmed the room without raising his voice. But the real shift was harder to measure. It was emotional, not political. College students were quoting Kennedy's final line in group chats. Veterans groups were organizing small fundraisers in his name. Even Maya, the single mom from the audience, had been tracked down by local news. He looked me in the eye, she said. That's all I remember, that he looked. Meanwhile, Kennedy returned to Capitol Hill as if nothing had happened. No victory lap, no media blitz, just back to work. One aide asked, "Did you watch the coverage?" Kennedy just shrugged. We did what we came to do. Bernie, for his part, went on the offensive in a new interview. He's not the future, he snapped. He's just a well-dressed detour. But something had changed, and not even Bernie could deny it. The public had seen two versions of leadership that night. One fierce, one firm, and they'd made their choice. Days later, the dust still hadn't settled. Analysts continued arguing over policy. Party operatives spun polls. But something more subtle was happening. Something that didn't fit in campaign ads or cable segments. People were talking. Not just about Kennedy, about tone, about how leaders speak, not just what they say. At a diner in Ohio, two veterans debated Kennedy's sincerity over coffee and biscuits. In a dorm room in Nevada, a freshman wrote a blog post titled, "Why I Trusted the Guy in the Glasses." And in D.C., Frank, the man with the military jacket, received a personal letter from Kennedy's office. It wasn't publicized. It wasn't branded. Just 3 handwritten lines. Frank, you weren't just right to ask. You were brave to do it. See you out there. JK, back in Louisiana, Kennedy attended a local school board meeting like always. No cameras, no fanfare. A teacher approached him in the hallway. "You said something the other night that stuck," she said. He looked at her. "Which part?" "The part about not having to scream." He smiled. "Still figuring that one out myself." She laughed. "Aren't we all?" That night, Kennedy sat alone in his office. No aides, no press, just silence and a single lamp burning over a stack of folders. He didn't check Twitter, he didn't reread coverage, he just wrote. Maybe a speech, maybe another letter, maybe nothing that would ever be seen. But one thing was clear. The moment hadn't made him, it had revealed him. And somewhere out there, Bernie Sanders was preparing his next rally, ready to keep fighting, refusing to let go. Because the truth was, they weren't enemies. They were contrasts. Two answers to the same question. And America, for better or worse, had just chosen tone over thunder. In a world where voices compete to be the loudest, Senator Kennedy reminded us that sometimes the quietest voice carries the deepest truth. Bernie Sanders stood firm, fiery, relentless, unwavering. But it was Kennedy's calm, unshaken presence that rewrote the moment. Not with power, not with politics, but with a pause and a promise to listen. Because leadership isn't always about dominating the room. Sometimes it's about disarming it. And in that moment, under the lights, one simple truth echoed louder than any shout. You don't have to scream to be heard.